recording. Okay, so this is the July 10th special meeting of the Design Review Panel. And as I stated, this is a high-level panel appointed by the Planning and Zoning Commission. There are currently 3 members appointed. One is unable to attend today. So I guess we will begin by calling the meeting officially to order at 9:03. And then we need to approve your minutes from June 8th. And those again have been forwarded to the Planning and Zoning Commission, and they were entered into the record for the public hearing for 497 Middle Turnpike that was held, I believe, on the 20th, and that will be continued to this upcoming meeting, July 17th. So Jan and Kathy, do one of you just want to move to approve the minutes as written or as amended, or do you have any changes?
So first of all, you did an amazing job of getting minutes together for a very complex conversation. I think they're terrific. There was just one thing that I had mentioned that I didn't see in the minutes, and that was concern about the layout of the handicapped units that were on the first floor that had an interior study and not a lot of light and air. So if that could be added, but you did a fantastic job of complex.
So interior, I'll make a note of that in today's minutes, and I will also submit that for the public hearing because that has not closed. So the interior layer on the first floor, it was the layout.
There's 3 accessible units that have an interior study and don't have a lot of light and air compared to the other units in the project.
Okay. All right, so Jan, did you have any comments regarding the minutes?
No, I'm fine with the minutes as it is, and my primary concern were about trails and connectivity, and I believe that component are there, so I'm fine with that.
Okay, great. So is there a motion to approve the minute? I mean, you don't really have a quorum because it's informal, but is there a motion or a consensus to approve these minutes as written? I mean, with the Kathy's amendment, rather.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, so with that, we can do an introduction of our applicants who are here today to discuss the Villages at Four Corners. Paul, I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you, and good morning, members of the Design Committee. My name is Attorney Paul Smith. I represent the owner applicant, Yami Development LLC. With me today is Andrew Graves with BL Companies, who's done the architectural work on the project. And the head engineer, John Schmidt, is also with us, who's done all the civil work. I'll just give you a brief overview and then turn it over to those guys really to get into the design and so forth. This property is about 8.74 acres. It's located right on the corner of what you would call Four Corners. It's 1659 Stores Road and 625 Middle Turnpike. So it's right on the corner. Currently on the site, there's the Hops 44 restaurant, the Toast restaurant, the gas and convenience store, and a pizza shop. All of those will remain. We're looking to develop the remainder of the property, which at one time I think was a former trailer park. It's now empty. And our proposal is to build 3 buildings on that property. The remaining property at 12,000 retail square foot space and 116 apartment units in 2 buildings. So having said that, I guess I would turn it over to Andy just to review the architectural portion of this. I don't know if we can connect screens or not like we did last time, Jen.
You should be able to.
Yeah, I can share screen and I'll.
And then one other thing I would add is there is adjacent to our property recently approved the standard, which is around 400 unit development. And one of the things we obviously looked at very carefully was how do we connect that sizable apartment project with our parcel so that you have the correct pedestrian flow really along Stores Road towards the campus. So with that in mind, I will turn it over to Andy.
Okay. Let me start by sharing screen. I'll just show the existing conditions. Okay. Well, as Paul indicated, this is Four Quarters, Middle Turnpike, Stores Road. We do have two restaurants on site that you mentioned are going to remain, Toast and Hops. There's a gas station in the corner with a canopy. There's a pizza place in here and a Dunkin' Donuts with a drive-through lane between the two buildings. Across the street, we have Cumberland Farms and a CVS. Both were developed without sort of any thought towards more traditional New England design where we got buildings fronting the corners. I know that was a big, well, there's some history. This project actually was started before COVID when Linda Painter was still here. And direction very much was to try and build something more along the lines of traditional neighborhood New England design with buildings fronting the street, with pedestrian connectivity in a mixed use fashion. Unfortunately, the existing neighborhood is very much traditional car oriented site development. So we did what we could. There was some change in direction as the project progressed. So let me bring up a site plan. We talked about the general configuration of the site. So this is Stores Road to the north, Middle Turnpike to our right. As you can see, the existing gas station, retail spaces are remaining, Hops, Toast are remaining along Middle Turnpike. We're proposing a commercial building, about 12,000 square feet adjacent to the existing gas station. Then two residential buildings, 2.5-story building here at the, well, eastern end of the site, fronting Stores Road. There was some controversy here about these wetlands. Originally, the direction from Linda Painter was that these were low-grade wetlands that were not important. Which was much more important was to engage the street with pedestrian connectivity. There was quite a bit of controversy, went back and forth on that. And in the end, it was determined those wetlands were more important than sort of more development.
Well, yeah, so just to give folks a high level overview, this came in for a pre-application and we did not have the advantage of having our wetland scientist. It had not gone through the
Right,
wetland
that's
process. This project has been approved by the Inland Wetlands Agency. And it was determined by them that, there's a lot of filling that was happening of wetlands. And so we wanted to try to, or they wanted to try to do something to keep the functional values of those wetlands. And so, I think the applicant is trying to balance, and the Inland Wetlands Agency is trying to balance preserving the natural resources and the wetland functions while developing the site.
Right, correct. I wasn't trying to make a judgment positively or negatively in either fashion. It was just, we do have some conflicting requirements, which every site does, where we're both trying to be respectful and responsive to the natural resources at the same time, develop a site that meets the more human pedestrian connectivity needs, where we're creating an architecture and forms that address the street. So here there was a complex balancing of those issues where we were, at the same time, we're preserving these wetlands that are adjacent to the street, which if they hadn't existed, we would have fronted the project with buildings and hidden the parking beyond that. But in this case, because the wetlands were deemed, or that balancing act, so we preserve the wetlands in the zone, but where we could address the street and have create this pedestrian connectivity and relationship to the streetscape, we brought our buildings forward where we could to either side of the wetland. So that's sort of part of what drove the general building configuration. So again, the commercial building here, adjacent to the other commercial uses, again, fronting on the street, we tried to create a building with some mass and some presence and a lot of outdoor space. These tenants are currently unidentified at this point. So it may be retail, maybe restaurant. Currently, we're proposing that it'll be retail space. But again, lots of outdoor hardscape space between that and the street. There's a 2.5-story retail building, again, trying to get some presence on the street with a scale that's appropriate that matches the building, the commercial building. The larger building, this is a 4-story building. Per the regulations, we have a 250-foot setback from the street for anything over 3 stories. So you can see this is our setback line. So this large 4-story residential building is set 250 back from the street. The goal, of course, was to make the buildings present and make as much connectivity between the buildings and the street and hide the parking as much as possible and try to avoid a parking lot, as it were. So we tried to keep the parking as single as a street with parking on it rather than a parking lot, as it were. Unfortunately, we tried to do angled parking or parallel parking, but the parking density requirements were just too high, so we had to go to the traditional 90-degree parking. So, but most of the parking here, the majority of the parking, probably 60% of it, is now hidden behind the buildings, either to the what would be the east or the north of the building. There is parking, as you know, particularly in this environment. Parking adjacent to commercial spaces is still very critical. We need to have parking adjacent to commercial spaces, otherwise it just won't lease. So we try to arrange the parking so most of the parking that serve the residential is behind the buildings. Main entrances to the residential buildings are at the rear. And there's some residential parking that is in this field, but the majority of this parking is then servicing the commercial building. Let's take us to an overview. So here's a 3D rendering looking south. This is the commercial building. Again, we try to give it some height, some higher parapets, again, to hide mechanical units. We're thinking this is going to be a couple tenants. This is the hardscape space we talked about along Storrs Road. This is the wetlands area that we are preserving. There's a fair amount of mature growth currently here. It would be cleaned up. So the brushy, scrubby, invasive stuff would be removed and planted to make it more pleasant, but there's a fair amount of true mature growth that would remain where the wetlands stopped. Again, we want to create some presence of buildings on the street. This is our residential building. This building has primarily 3-bedroom units. Each of the units has a large porch to allow for entrances directly off the street. From a design approach, we decided to use, there was nothing much in way of context around the site. It was mostly prototype commercial structures like the CVS and the Rite Aid up and down the street. So and the buildings on site were mostly kind of, I don't know if you even call them New England vernacular, but that's sort of the style we design approach we took. In our initial meetings, the big concern of the planning board was scale of the buildings. So we did what we could to reduce the scale and texture of the buildings to the rear by using dormers, lower roofs, gable forms, and dormers, and keeping the scale of the buildings where they approach the street fairly small. For amenity space, well, as I mentioned here, these are primarily, we can go into the floor plans briefly. This is primarily building with 3-bedroom units. They all have large 300-square-foot porches directly off the parking with direct entrances. For 5 of the units, the main entrance to the building is here with a central corridor, with a typical double-loaded corridor for a multifamily building. This end of the building on the first floor has a large amenity space. Go there briefly. So we have some co-working spaces, the leasing offices down at this end. We have a large kitchen, this could be a meeting room or a large dining area and lounge. This is the area that meets the adjacent exterior amenity space. So here are our amenity spaces, a leasing office, and then a large outdoor 4,000 or 5,000 square feet gathering space that then would be accessible from both buildings. So we have a mixture of 1, 2s, and 3 bedrooms. Primarily, the 3 bedrooms are in the smaller building. Per the regulations, the main entrance to the lobby is on the back side of the building. We have a large package drop off. We have bike storage as required, half a bike storage space per bedroom. So we have a total of 70 bike storage units directly off the lobby, the central elevator and core stairs at either end. Most of the first floor buildings have access to the exterior with double doors, with small porches, and creating as much connectivity between first floor units and the surrounding green space, the exterior of the building. These are fairly generous sized units. All the units, all the multi-bedroom units have a master bedroom suite with a large walk-in closet and attached bathroom. Generous kitchens with either dining tables and living rooms, and then a second bedroom with large closets and a secondary bathroom. All 2-bedroom units have 2 bathrooms, and all 3-bedroom units have 2.5 baths. There was 1 stack of 3-bedroom units in the main building, again with a large eating kitchen, large but generous dining area in the kitchen, and then again all the bedroom units have a generous master bedroom type suite with a walk-in closet and a large bathroom. The smaller building is mostly 3-bedroom units, as I mentioned. I should mention both buildings have compactors and chutes, trash rooms. Again, this building has prerequisite bicycle storage adjacent to the lobby. Large, generous 3-bedroom units with master bedrooms, secondary baths, and large eating kitchens with large dining room tables. And again, connectivity outside with huge porches with doors that guarantee the connectivity between the ground floor units and the surrounding landscape. The commercial building, again, as I identified, there are not any tenants identified yet. We've made provisions for 2 possible tenants. We've created generous hardscape areas if there's sidewalk sales, outdoor eating, whatever the case may be. Again, with a close connection between the interior space, the hardscape, and the streetscape for strong pedestrian connectivity. It was also important, unfortunately, we were bounded on both ends of the project by streams that created difficult issues for crossing. There was a desire, of course, to connect to the adjacent development to create the pedestrian connectivity between the adjacent site and our site and the retail uses here. So we are providing a walkway. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, because of the wetland issue, we couldn't extend the sidewalk, which is somewhat unfortunate, but we did provide this connectivity back this way to a crossing back in this area.
So just as a little, just so that folks understand a little bit about the context with the standard at Four Corners, which is the adjacent 392 unit that was in the former Willards and Bagel One and building. They are because of the wetland system, the planning and zoning required them to do the wetland to do the sidewalk on the kind of in the interior, so that it's a kind of in a wooded trail, and there's a bridge. And so my understanding is that this application is connecting directly to the sidewalk, the trail at the standard.
Correct.
You show us where that is.
So this is where Stores Road begins to curve. This is the sidewalk here. It comes off the back edge of the parking lot, extends along this, and then turns. At this point, this is where the woodland path would be to the bridge to the adjacent development, which is just to the left off the sheet here.
Andy, could you go back to the aerial just to show them on the aerial how
Yeah,
it
that
relates
might
to our
be
site?
So the back of our site is here. This is that wetlands area. This area is the area of the new development. So our pathway would come through this wooded area and connect to the new development, which is in this area here.
Thank you.
If that's helpful. Okay, I guess I'll conclude my remarks there and open it to give people some time to ask some questions. John, do you want anything?
To start out, if you could walk me through where the accessible units are and what the path is from the accessible parking to the units, from the units to the recreational area and from the units to the dumpsters, the accessible units to the dumpsters and how that works.
Well, residents would not have to travel to the dumpsters at all. There are trash rooms on each floor in each room, in each building. So the trash room exists here. So all they would have access to this point, don't need to go to the dumpsters at all. For the large building, again, there are trash rooms on every floor. So the residents would never have to have access, walk directly to the dumpsters. As you know, ADA, actually in Connecticut, all units are type B, which are adaptable, and only 10% are type A. The type A units, we haven't designated them yet, but based on the unit design configuration, any of these units can be in a type A. So they'll be spread per code as required in a universal fashion throughout the floor plans to match. Again, we have to give the handicap people accessibility to all unit types and styles, so it'll be mixed uniformly throughout the entire building complex. From a site amenity point of view, we have the handicap spaces clustered near the main entrance of each of the buildings. In the commercial building, it's entirely accessible. We have handicap units along this frontage here. The amenity space, again, is accessible interiorly, and this is at great access between the interior amenity space and the exterior amenity space and along all these sidewalks.
Could you tell us a little bit about the landscapes, if you could? What would be the changes in the parcel?
The site is slopes fairly steeply from the right-hand side of the site to the left. So there actually is a significant amount of regrading that occurs throughout this entire portion of the site. You can see our limit of disturbance here along the perimeter of the site. There is a retaining wall here because there's a fairly significant amount of grade change at this back corner. This here you can see is the limits of wetlands. So we are really tightly bounded by wetlands really on all three sides of the site. There's very little change to the grading and landscaping at the existing portion of the building. But from this portion on, the entire site is going to be completely regraded and redeveloped because of a fairly significant heavy grade change.
And so can you describe, I mean, you've raised the whole site up and there's steep grading along all the outside edges. Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, let me go back to let me pull that
or the interior edges of the site, I should say.
Yeah, let's see. So I guess starting at the street side, grading changes here are not significant. Obviously, we got to blend with the street. This is the wetlands area we're preserving. There is some grade change here. You can see we're from 595 down to 591. So the street is climbing as we head towards the center of town. In order to make the grades work, as you say, we're filling significantly at this side. These are detention basins. Most of the detention is accomplished because the amount of impervious surface with detention basins under the parking lot and green space areas. As you mentioned, there's fairly significant. We try to minimize the amount of retaining walls. So the only place we really have a retaining wall is just this area here with the parking lot. That's very close to the lot line. So from this point, a retaining wall from here to here. I guess top of wall. Oh my God, I'm getting buzzed by a mosquito. Okay. Top of wall at this end is, well, not that far, 585. 86. So here it's about 5 feet, 589 to 584, the bottom of wall, and then tapers to 0 back at this end. So it's a fairly significant grade here, but again, we try to minimize the amount of retaining walls to keep the appearance of the site as natural as possible. We do have detention basins here and here, and a fairly significant slope here, which will be seeded and graded. See if I can pull up a landscaping plan. So again, because of this fairly significant filling, we do have large wetland mitigation areas at this end of the site. Again, we have a number of large wetland mitigation areas to offset the filling that we've done in these areas. And again, that's the general approach, was to minimize retaining walls as where we could. Much of the site is taken by parking and wetlands mitigation. And you can see that's what's controlling this pathway here, is that we have this large wetland mitigation area, our connectivity to the adjacent properties here. You can see the large, you see how the wetlands step back in the zone, which is why we use this area here as our connectivity to the adjacent parcel just to our east. That answers your question or not?
Partially. So on the existing, or the area of the existing parking lot next to Toast, et cetera, that parking lot now slopes quite a bit, and you've significantly reduced the sloping there. And that seemed to be an opportunity to me to make more of the landscape accessible to the site and reduce the depth of the foundations for the new buildings. Can you talk about why that decision was made?
Well, we're trying to create this nice relationship between the building and the adjacent landscape. As you can see, we actually have in order to sort of mitigate and normalize and actually reduce the amount of fill, we do have a fairly steep grading bank at this corner of the building in order to keep this portion of the building as low as possible to minimize the amount of fill that occurred at this end of the building. Unfortunately, the length of this building was fighting grades. As you can see, the grades drop fairly significant across the face of this building. And so we have a planted landscape bank between this corner of the building in order to keep the fill at a minimum at this end of the building. I'm not sure that we could have really gained a whole lot. Maybe John Smith can talk in more detail about the trade-offs we made in order to make the grading for the site work to minimize the impact, the amount of fill, while at the same time creating a nice relationship between the buildings and the existing streetscape. We really had not a lot we could do about dropping the grades in this area because of connectivity to the existing facilities, and wanting to create a nice relationship between these spaces and this the new commercial building. We did, unfortunately, and this is a sacrifice we made. And I was maybe arguing to go in the other direction to actually increase the fill at this corner of the site in order to create a nice relationship here. But that was sort of the compromise. This corner was dropped, and we do have a fairly steep bank here, which I'm not thrilled about. But I think it was always a process of trade-offs to minimize the fill and create, like you said, a nice relationship between this corner and the existing site beyond, not create too much of a grade change at this interior, and maintain a nice relationship between these structures here. So
Yeah,
that was sort of a balancing act that we were fighting with.
so my question is that the existing, the parking lot that serves Toast and there currently slopes further than you have it towards the back, and that would have allowed the grade to be lower at the rest of the site, but it's been significantly pushed up here. Again, taking away the relationship to the existing green and causing the challenge you talked about the bottom of that long building kind of being below grade. Can you talk about that decision?
This is John Schmitz with the BL Civil Engineer. I just wanted to address the existing parking lot just to the west of the existing restaurant, Toast and Hops Company. The grades in that parking lot will remain the same. We're not lowering or raising the grades in that parking lot. We will be repaving it and addressing some of the landscaping there. But the existing landscaping to the west, we have a wetland area along the western border there. We're proposing some wetland mitigation in that area, which includes digging out an area to provide a level area that intercepts the groundwater table in order to provide new wetland mitigation. You can see there roughly 7,000 square feet of new mitigation in there, which will increase the amount of wetlands along the westerly side of the site and adjacent to that parking lot. Because we had to lower that area to get to the groundwater table, there will be a slope between the existing parking and that new wetlands area. I just want to be clear that the parking lot itself will remain the same grade.
Oh, so you're lowering the adjacent grade?
That's correct.
And to collect, to use it for retention is the purpose of that?
No, it's a mitigation measure to offset proposed wetland filling. So when we fill wetlands, there's a criteria, there's a requirement to create or enhance or restore existing wetlands. And usually it's a 2-to-1 ratio. So what we've done is take the amount of wetlands that we're disturbing and then creating new wetland areas. And the peer reviewer that we worked with on the wetlands application felt very strongly that we wanted to intercept the groundwater to give the mitigation areas the best chance to survive. And so we had to excavate this area down to reach the groundwater table.
I see.
That's really helpful. So you're talking about wetland banking, right? So you have to offset the area that you disturb on the wetland areas and you just build another artificial wetland in another location.
That's correct. And just for information purposes, there will be a long-term monitoring going on. So we just don't build it and walk away. The landscape architect, or rather the soil scientist, will be monitoring over a period of years to ensure that the wetlands is productive and that it does, that it is successful. And so, on a yearly basis, they'll provide a report to show how those wetlands are doing. If any plants have died, they'll be replaced on a yearly basis. I think that monitoring goes out 5 years, if I'm correct.
So you mentioned
That's
2
right.
to 1, so that you basically create half of the area that you
Double.
said original?
We doubled the amount.
Okay, create a double space, okay. So I think that's really helpful to understand the context in terms of a landscape and so the slope, I mean, the slope variation across the parcel. Do you have a rough estimation how much slope that you could expect on the highest point and lowest ones?
I don't have the numbers. I don't know, Andy, if you could zoom in, we could actually check what some of the numbers are. I would tell you that all the sidewalks that we have on site are all ADA compliant. We don't have any handicap ramps aside from curb ramps. So we've been able to keep things under 5% for all the sidewalks. I guess, yeah, on the north end of the site, I think if we go all the way up to the building, yeah, see there. Yeah, so we're looking at elevations of 288, 287 in that area at the north side of the site. And then I think up by the Dunkin' Donuts at the south end of the site, we're roughly the 600 range. So we're dropping approximately 13 feet across the entire site.
Mm-hmm. There were two reasons that I would ask about the slope variation. One was about the ADA component. The other one was about stormwater runoff. If there's any water that's there, do you expect that runoff will actually lead up to the natural and artificial wetland, or do you have any other LID measures that you are considering?
So there's a couple of things to consider with stormwater. We're trying to mimic the existing drainage patterns. And as Andy mentioned, we're surrounded on three sides by wetlands today. And so our water today is going into those three wetland areas. And under the proposed condition, we're trying to mimic that and continue to discharge water into those wetlands to ensure their long-term viability and success. We do have stormwater catch basins throughout the site that collect the water from the parking lot, as well as from the roofs, and discharge them into underground detention areas and also into the wetland mitigation areas. And eventually all that water will continue to drain into the existing wetland areas after it's been renovated for water quality purposes. The underground detention systems do have under drains, so certain percentage of the water that's collected will be infiltrated back into the groundwater. And then of course, the project complies with the landscape requirements as far as perimeter landscaping or interior landscaping with shade trees throughout the parking area. And then just for water quality purposes, we do have deep sump catch basins, hydrodynamic separators to remove suspended solids, floatables and oil from the stormwater. So it's clean prior to getting discharged into the wetland areas.
So looking at this, there's about 15-foot grade change on the north end of the site between the parking lot and the retention basins. Is that correct?
That's correct. But I just
Yeah.
wanted to note those basins are actually acting as the wetland mitigation areas. The stormwater, for the most part, is being controlled by the underground detention systems. There will be stormwater discharged into the wetland basins, but they're designed mostly for wetland mitigation, not for stormwater.
And then at the end of the long apartment block, at the south end, the building's about 5 feet below the adjacent sidewalk grade, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. And then there's a similar slope along the west side
That's correct.
of the site. Yeah.
So there's a retail building and also residential buildings in the site, right?
Yeah.
And so how about sewer system? Is it combined the sewer overflow system, or is it separate from rainwater runoff?
That's correct. Yeah, sanitary sewers are separate from stormwater. Sanitary sewers will be collected and discharged into the sanitary sewer line that's in Route 44. The residential building will actually, sanitary sewer will flow into a pump station, and then we'll be pumping pumping sanitary flows from the residential buildings. Yeah, that's our location right there for our pump station. And then we'll be pumping our sanitary flows up to the sewer line that exists in Route 44.
Mhm.
And both the existing restaurant and the gas station are already connected into the sanitary sewer system.
Mhm. Thank you.
Are there more questions? Can you talk a little bit about the community space and the location of that space and the reason for the location there as opposed to more central to the site and for the green area to have more views from more eyes?
It's interesting. I was also the lead designer for the downtown development, which is a more conventional, traditional mixed use development. And in a sense, I think we can think of types of amenity spaces. There's a conventional segregated vision of everything in its own little bucket and box, where we have this as a specific amenity for the residents, as I showed before. It's got a large kitchen for parties, a meeting area with workspaces, and then the idea is that would be connected to an outdoor space. And the reason it was located here is because it could service both buildings. This is a smaller building. To create a whole separate amenity space within a smaller building didn't make sense. That'll be concentrated at this end. Residents would have access to it, so it was adjacent to both these buildings. So that creates sort of a more private amenity function at this end of the site. In a sense, the outdoor spaces, commercial buildings, is also kind of an amenity space, which is how we thought about in a traditional neighborhood design. The commercial spaces are amenity spaces for the residents. So in a sense, more private, more segregated from the commercial locations. We have a more private sort of amenity space, which is more specific to the residences. But then all these large outdoor gathering spaces at the commercial building are also kind of an amenity space for people who live in the community. So I think that made some sense to have, then we have good connectivity between our residential buildings, both here across the face of the wetlands in this way, to sort of a more open space. Hopefully maybe there's a little coffee shop here or whatever that creates an amenity space that's more public, and then more private back corner serving both these buildings in this corner was sort of a more private amenity space, more for residents alone. That was the general thinking of that process.
And can you also walk me through the new entrance to the site and how the pedestrian access works compared to the cars going into there? The alignment to me is hard to understand.
Let's see, where's it go? So, in a way, we were fortunate because there was an existing traffic signal here to control automobile traffic here at the current entrance to the site, which we're maintaining. This is the main entrance to the site here. We are providing paver crosswalk here that connects the new commercial building to the sidewalk and the sidewalk to the existing commercial spaces on site. I mean, unfortunately, this was very car centric. It's a gas station, so you have lots of vehicular access there now, both from Middle Turnpike and Stores Road. So this existing vehicular circulation, unfortunately, sort of bisects and sort of segregates all these uses as is. And but that is kind of what we had to deal with. So where we wanted to make those connectivities, we try to make it as safe as possible. There was a traffic light to add control here, which is nice. which is safer for pedestrians. And then we added nice pavers here to create a strong sense of connectivity here between this and the existing sidewalks to the front. There is a bus shelter here and existing pavement and connectivity to these spaces out here. We have crosswalks here, sidewalks here, crosswalks here, so that there's as much, striped, dropped handicap access, nice, all compliant, ADA compliant sidewalks that connect both the commercial building to the sidewalk to the, I guess they're actually technically the west side of our residential building, and then pedestrian connectivity both over the hops and toast. So most of the parking circulations I mentioned before is at the rear of the residential building. So we do have this nice ring of sidewalks with crosswalks here and connectivity back to here to mitigate and make it as comfortable as possible. And there are certain challenges based on the current layout of the site that we really couldn't change. So I think we've done a good job of creating a nice ring of pedestrian access, connecting all these uses here, and then some nice connections here.
So can you go to the north east corner of the site? That's where the new entrance is, correct?
This is a secondary right-in, right-out only. We would think that, again, just to make circulation easier, so that people who are coming to the residential uses don't have to circulate through the commercial and take some of the commercial load off of this intersection here. So people coming from the north, I guess technically the west, would be able to come in, take a right in, and then park this way without having to circulate this way through the commercial spaces. So this is really a right in, right out only. The main entrance is going to remain. I presume this is primarily going to serve the residential uses only. I doubt that anybody using the commercial spaces would bother to circulate behind both residential buildings and circulate in this direction. So again, the primarily entrance to site besides the residents will still be at this traffic light by this between these two commercial buildings.
And so at that new entrance that you're showing, I understand that that's a pedestrian crossing there that seems to be aligned in the middle of the roadway. Am I misunderstanding that?
Yeah, I don't see this as getting a whole lot of pedestrian traffic. I mean, I guess the pedestrian traffic flowing through here would be people coming from our property to the west of us that want.
But isn't what you're showing going into the road a pedestrian crossing? Isn't that what that?
Yeah, this is a pedestrian crossing here.
So go up to the top of the sheet. Isn't that a pedestrian crossing of 195?
The only pedestrian crossing we have is the existing pedestrian crossing Stores Road over to the CVS, which is here. That's an existing pedestrian crossing at the traffic light that exists now. We're not providing any. There's really nothing.
That's at CVS heading to what we know as Dick's Auto Care, right?
Right. Dick's Auto Care is the crossing.
I can offer an explanation though. Andy, if you go to the northerly driveway, the right in, right out, you'll see that the plan shows some lines crossing 195, the LOD. Right. That is just indicates where the pavement will be cut. We have to make a connection to the water line in the street. So that's just simply indicating that we'll be doing some pavement work in 195 in order to connect to the water line. But there would be no pedestrian connection across 195 at that location.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, sorry for the confusion.
That. That's okay. Good.
And just one more thing to add, Andy, if you pan down to the bus, or rather the signal, there's an existing bus stop just in between the two signals, correct, right there. So so the development will have access to that bus stop via the connectivity of the sidewalks. Just want to point it out. And the other thing to point out as well is we're also extending sidewalks along 44. So currently there's sidewalks that wrap around to the gas station. We'll be extending those sidewalks further to the west in front of the Hops restaurant, crossing their driveway, and then down a little further to our almost to the property line on the west side. So again, adding some new sidewalks along Hops or in front of Hops, and then even connecting Hops front door to that new sidewalk with a new sidewalk to connect to their entrance.
Just curious about that pedestrian path that will also be connected with the pedestrian path near the southern part of the site where you can see red rocks and Dollar General, etc. I mean, I just wanted to know, where your new pedestrian path, where your new pedestrian path will go. I mean, we don't want them to stop at somewhere there, so.
So you're referring to the new sidewalk along 44?
Yes.
So that sidewalk will just dead end at the in that area. Yeah, Andy, if you want, can you drop a person in there? Can you drop in street view? You'll see that there's a guide rail there today, because there's a culvert under the road that carries drainage under the road, and it discharges basically at our property line. And so there's
This is post. This is
right. And
yeah.
you just spin around, you'll see there's a guide rail a little further to the
This is the zone
left,
where we're adding the new sidewalks.
right?
And you can
And
see
then
the guide rail and
that guide rail is protecting the culvert that's there. And so our sidewalk will pretty much go behind the guide rail and then end just short of those rocks. There's no way to continue it forward without somehow crossing the wetlands or going over the wetlands.
So is there just because I think that's going to be an issue for the Planning and Zoning Commission, but we can talk about that offline. But is there a way to like, what is involved with connecting that? Because basically we're taking the pedestrians to a dead end. They have to there's no crosswalk, and so
Would it make sense to provide pedestrian? This is unfortunate. This is not a good.
Not really. I mean, it's funny. We talked about this with the police commission. We talked about this with the peer reviewer, and for exactly why you're saying, we didn't include that in the original project. We didn't extend the sidewalk to nowhere, and it was kind of asked that we do that anyway, and so we did. And now we're at a point where, well, now we have a sidewalk that goes nowhere, which is why we didn't have it in the first place. So
what would it take to connect it?
To connect it further to the west?
Yeah.
So it would have to span over the wetlands.
Right. So
there would need to be a brick. Now, of course, our property line only extends to in between the wetlands, right? So we don't have on the land on the other side, but there would need to be a bridge or some sort to get it over the wetlands and where that culvert discharges.
Yeah.
There's kind of a ditch there that would need to be spanned.
And where, can you just show where your property line ends, just approximately on that?
I think it's
these rocks, right, John?
yeah. I think maybe a little closer to the a little closer to the telephone pole. You see, there's a leak off there where stormwater drains in between the curbing and runs off down to the ditch. So yeah, there you go. So yeah, right where the leak off is, that's about where our property line ends.
So here's a telephone pole. Here's a leak off. Actually, our property line back here.
Yeah, and then there's another leak off just to the north there.
Yeah.
Right there. There's two leak offs. So that's where we're ending. And there is a connection at the signalized intersection at 195 and 44. A crosswalk there as well.
Yeah, there's this bike path, which is nice.
This is the bike, correct. Yeah, the bike path.
And so we thought that this made a whole lot more sense to connect here safely at the intersection and connect to this nice bike path here, then this would be very dangerous to try and put a crossing this back here where there's no signal or protection. So the bike path exists right on the other side of that, which is why we thought we have this very strong, great pedestrian connection here. Why create a hazard by trying to get people across here simply to extend their sidewalk across the front of our site, was our thinking.
Yeah, mid-block crossings can be tricky sometimes.
Yeah.
one other question that I have is that, so behind your residential building, there is a one apartment building. I think that is outside of your property boundary. Have you ever thought about the view shed between, I'm not sure how far those two buildings would be, but is there any potential issues that you can think of in terms of view shed?
I think this whole back portion of the property is very heavily wooded. And we're not really disturbing any of these existing growth back here. So you can go back to
Yeah, I would add, obviously, we're going to impact that somewhat with the wetland mitigation area. But
yeah, our
on
residential building is
our
back
side,
here. And
right.
this is all heavily wooded. I think it'd be the view
Right.
here towards this would be, the main view from the entire site really is into this green space, this really wooded area, wetland area, and not, this is quite forward from our apartments. Our apartments are back in here looking this way.
Morning, how are you? Good, how are you? Good.
And this is heavily wooded as well. I don't think there's going to be much view back towards the rear of this apartment building.
Can you show us where the wetland mitigation, where you're going to be doing that clearing, where that is on the aerial, just in related to the Roselle Apartments and your site? I just want to make sure I.
Bring these up to, hold on.
So it would be to the west of the existing Hops parking area. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right,
We're going to
okay.
construct that slope. So obviously, we have to remove vegetation to to construct that area. But it's all that work could be on our side of the property line, obviously.
I mean,
Oh,
it
yeah.
looks like you're going to have to remove all of the existing vegetation to get that. I mean, that's a pretty aggressive slope. I think on both edges of the property. Isn't that true? Or do you have a way to do that? I don't see any tree wells or anything to keep the existing vegetation.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. I mean, we do have to remove that material in order to get down to the wetland table in that area. We're not going into the wetlands with the work on our side of the property. We're staying out of the wetlands in this area. We're extending it. But yeah, I mean, we would certainly be removing, like I said, those trees and that vegetation in order to make that,
I think
to accomplish that work.
the wetlands mitigation is occurring like in the zone here.
Right. You can kind of see the wetland stream almost in there.
Yeah, you can see the
Running
stream.
all the
Right, and so we're always on this side of the stream here. We're
But
not-
you're also increasing, I mean, that may not be the wetlands mitigation, but because of the changing grade, the slope is much more aggressive on your plans than in the existing to get down to there. So I don't see how you accomplish that slope without removing the vegetation unless, is there something I'm missing?
Well, yeah, if you go on the left there, I mean, you can see, I don't know if you could highlight that stone wall, which is kind of the limits of on the right, I guess, on the
Yeah.
plan, which, so you're correct. I mean, we have to create the slope in order to get down the wetlands, and the stone wall, if you could highlight that, but the stone wall there is basically the limits of the vegetation. So there is, 15, 20 feet or so of grass between the stone wall and the parking today. That'll certainly still be there. It'll just be at a steeper slope. But to your point, yeah, I mean, we do have to remove trees in order to accomplish the wetland mitigation in this area.
I mean, I think it would be really worth studying all of these steep slopes to see, are there ways to retain some of the existing trees that would probably require tree wells? To do that, what kind of planting is necessary on that, slope to retain the soil, to retain the edge of the parking area. Again, I may be missing something, but I think that's a pretty aggressive slope on both areas. And I think it's going to dramatically change what those look like and the views into that. And,
I would, my guess would be, and we could certainly have our landscape architects take a look at this, but it'd be probably make more sense to replant and try and save. It might be a a difficult task that may not be successful if we try to well what trees that are in that area. We have to, again, survey and see what trees of what quality are actually in there, what species they are.
I don't know that I don't know that tree wells in this area would work, only because we're cutting the grade down. If we were raising the grade around it, you could kind of well around a tree and try to save the
Yeah,
roots.
yeah.
But in this case, we're actually cutting down to lower the area, so we would be into the root system.
So
The
I
trees
guess
would
we
need to
could
be
look at
removed.
trying to more aggressively replant this area if that's a concern.
Right.
I just think it needs to be studied. I mean, again, those are steep slopes. On the south side of the building, that's a pretty steep slope, around the building and the grade drainage into those. I think all of those need to be studied for planting and for view. You look at the plan and you see all this green area around, and it seems like, that's good. But when you really look at the profile of that, that's all, down quite a ways. And so how that's handled and planted is going to make a big difference.
Yeah, if you draw a line from the back of the existing parking lot, it sort of meets the back corner of the building. So this building is entirely, it's very deceptive. It's really entirely in this zone here. It really doesn't extend past the back edge of the parking lot.
Yeah, I'm not worried about the view from that building. I'm worried about the long-term viability of the slopes and the view on your site, the quality of life in the housing and
I
how
see.
it relates to there. But, I mean, not that I don't think it's important to look at the surrounding buildings, because that is important. But again, we're stores, we're out in the country, and I think the more that any green space can be amenable to what is I know you've maximized the units under the zoning, which is what you want to do, but for your sake and for the sake of the people who live there in the long run, the quality of the environment on the site is a primary concern.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we can certainly
our
take a
original
look at it.
concepts actually had some green space for amenities for the residents, but the wetlands mitigation and other things, unfortunately, the project developed sort of took those away. So, no,
Yeah,
I
I think,
understood and appreciate that, and we can certainly do what we can to try and.
and I think we're actually under our maximum density as well. So we've maxed out the site. We've used the site as best we could, but there are opportunities to add more density if under the code.
Yeah. Well, I know we're entering into this after you've been working on it for a long time. But I mean, I think it's really good to have retail on the site. Retail along 195 makes sense. I think that's good to see. It's good to have the porches. I think the end of the retail building near 195 might be able to be more, screened with vegetation and other things to because that's a pretty busy road. I continue to be concerned about the slope both at the edges and, wonder if there aren't ways to handle more of that through stepping of the building. I realize you want to keep one central entry for that very long building, but if there are way to step that or to do other things that might deal with some of this. I understand that, you've used the wetland replacement along the edges of the site. If some of that could be more internal to the site, it might be a greener, more amenable space for the residents of the building. The community space is very nice. It's nice to have that adjacent to exterior space. I think that people use community space when they see it, where they see other people, where they can look into it, where they can casually pass by it. And I think that the current location makes that harder to do. So, kids won't see their friends out playing. People won't see their friends sitting there as much as with another location. But I think it's really great to have it. It's a really nice space. So it'd be good if there was more ways to see into that. Maybe that's through the corner of the building. Maybe it's through others, entry signage or archways or other kinds of things. Dumpsters are always a problem. I wonder if you're using the trash rooms, if you need as many dumpsters and as much transition to them, if that's being a staff process that might open up more green space for that. I think really looking at the steep areas and seeing if, even small mitigations to make those more plantable and usable would be great. Are some of my thoughts about the project.
So can I just summarize, Kathy, because I want to make sure I'm able.
I know
to-
it's a lot. Yeah.
It's a lot. So you're happy with the retail, but you feel like efforts to sort of screen it a little bit more from 195. Is that what I'm?
No, so not the retail, but the residential building, and it's on at 95. So I think the retail building is fine. I look forward to more details about how that green space is used and it's becomes amenable. I think it'll end up being hardscape when you do that, but that's fine. My concern was, though, as the residential building meets 195, there's good things that have been done. The porch area there is excellent or whatever. I think it would be nice to have more green area, more trees, maybe a small stone wall, other things to separate that building more from 195. I think that's it isn't that much different than the residential face up to the building, and I think that more screening of that would be helpful. I appreciate the paving, but I don't think that's really useful to the residents. So making that more green area immediately usable by the building itself would be better.
Would there be
That
a
could
way
be
to
like
screen
eyes
it?
on the street, amenity space, if it was protected from the street more. So this could become a much more visible gathering space. If
Like,
we
is
had
there a way to screen it? For example, even like just a price, like I'm just thinking even through a structure screen, like like that price chopper. So there's just some sort of barrier, because I think I agree with Kathy that it'll be hard to activate that with people when it's right on 195.
Yeah, it's a good thought.
All right, so the screening of the residential from 195, the slopes, can you just talk a little bit more about that, Kathy, just so I have that documented?
Yeah, so it's a challenging site, as was mentioned, because of the extreme slope, from one edge of the site to the other. I think it's over 30 feet. And then in addition, you're digging out more to connect to the wetlands. And, I understand that's to reach the water table, and that's really challenging. But any mitigation of that slope to make those the steepness of the landscape next to those wetlands less, or to be able to enter into it so that it becomes usable to the site would be good. Likewise, any way that the slope into the south part of the building, which raises the grade proximate to the units, which I think with good planting could become more of an amenity, but we're not seeing that now. So right now, maybe there's a way in with regrading or whatever to make that more consistent and plantable in it and make it a better view and a better space for the residents of the building there. And if that's not clear, ask questions.
Yeah, I'm gonna, I think I will type this up and make sure that I capture that, Kathy.
Right.
But I think you're saying activate it, make sure that it's planted, make sure that the residents from the building, I mean, obviously Roselle's too, but the residents of the building have a better experience, can use it, it's plantable, it's the view is better.
Right. And that's for the space right adjacent to the buildings, but then all of those steep, very steep slopes at the, north and west side of the slope, I think those need to be studied to figure out how trees can be part of that and how ensure that the planting supports the maintenance of the slope.
Okay.
So there's a very steep slope around, the two sides of the site. And, I understand those are to get down to the wetlands and the existing configuration of the site. But I think how those are treated and planted will make a big difference in how nice a place this is to live and the ability to maintain it in the long run.
And then can you talk a little bit about your comment regarding the community space, Kathy?
Yeah, so my understanding of the literature is that people use community space when they can see other people using it and approach it and kind of get a sense of what's going on without entering into it. And so by placing the exterior space in the corner and the interior space at the end of a hallway, it's harder for people to do that. And so I'm wondering if there are ways through fenestration, through entryway, maybe studying relocating it to make it more accessible and usable to the residents. And I visit a lot of multifamily housing where the community space is locked most or all of the time. And part of that is because it's not visible, it's harder to, so I think those are issues to study. I think ways to think about entry to that space from the common space, thinking about how people go into the building when they see that could be useful to make that, to activate that space more for the community.
I'm just wondering about the connection in that corner between the two buildings. Is there, because I see here, is there a way to kind of allow for like a nice entryway there so that folks can actually, you're bringing, because I could see in your point, Kathy, that maybe that becomes like an attractive nuisance too. You have things happening there that you don't want to have happen there because it is isolated, but yet I also see the value of having private space for the residents that where they can go out and but I don't know, what about that entry, just that corner, making it so.
I think that's a really good point. If that, if there was some seating there or, I don't think that this is possible given the way, the bus service works, but if there was a reason to be there, and then you can kind of look in and see who's in the area, who's playing. I mean, there aren't any amenities that I see for young children. I think that could be useful there, something that would cause that to be a place you want to go. it's great that there's some entries for first floor residents, but other residents don't have exterior space, and, really thinking through the usability of that space and what amenities meet what of the residents' needs. And some of that might be able to be, could there be some great art or, that's climbable in that corner, or something that would bring people there, and be a reason to, come look and walk. And then, maybe that brings you into the exterior space.
Yeah, I appreciate your comments. I guess, I mean, where I've seen them fail is almost when they try and make them too connected to nature and completely isolated, like you said, but you do have, I was almost worried that it wasn't, I mean, we have a drive aisle and parking on two sides, so people are going to be going by this space all the time, and it's visible from the parking lot in the front too. It's visible this way, it's visible as people coming out of the project every day. It does have a fair amount of visibility. We could, I'm thinking, even if maybe the space extended out this way, so maybe it got more visibility. So part of the amenity space climbed through between the two buildings and created some sort of.
I think that's a really nice idea.
It sort of says, it tells you what's going on back here because it's visible out along this whole fronted sidewalk, so that it spills and grabs the interior corner of the space, maybe.
Yep. Yeah, and that might even be, some space that opens into the community room. So it's sometimes like if you're having a community-wide event that maybe, people enter there.
That's a great idea. We can add a lot more glass along this whole facade that open this inside the building out to the space as well.
That would be, I think that would go a long way, because you want to, I mean, that could be that's an outdoor room. I mean, it's not that big, but it could really be an outdoor room of some kind that it connects to the interior
Right.
of that space. It makes the interior space more pleasant as well.
Right.
Okay.
And it takes you to the east side where you get some morning sun, where, the other side is north. So that, that could be a really, maybe have a morning coffee club for retired residents or whatever.
Right. So north is this way. So south, it gets from midday to through the afternoon. This gets a lot of sun here. North is running this way.
Yeah, that area that you pulled out would get nice morning sun.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I have one other question. As you're driving through here, using those created wetlands as so that people experience that as they drive in, and have that be more of just really, so it feels like on one side it's very natural, I think, because you could try to enhance that way. I don't know if there's something you could do there, but we haven't heard from Soyeon, this is kind of all of her like bailiwick. This is what she does for a living.
It's funny. I live in Litchfield. I live near White's Woods, and the most popular walking trail and the 400 acres that they have is a wooden boardwalk that goes around the wetlands area, which is extremely popular.
Yeah.
People are there. Of all the wooded trails, that's the most popular one. It's always jammed with people. And I agree that making people appreciate those natural landscapes as much as possible is a great idea. I mean, it would be nice that whatever we plant in here is along the lines of whatever natural indigenous species are in that area, to try and make this feel as natural and part of because we're looking over this beautiful wetlands area, wooded wetlands area beyond as well. So it'd be nice to bring that same kind of plantings and feelings to these regraded areas to make them feel as natural as part of the environment beyond as well. I'm not sure how we can make it more connected than it is now because of the slopes, but we can certainly think about something.
Well, a boardwalk like you're talking about that takes advantage of, fitting into the slope and going around and gives a connected walking trail both to the other community, but here, I mean, to have a nice little loop to be able to walk would be fantastic.
One of the things that I've talked with Soyeon about, just this is and I've talked also with our Parks and Natural Resources Committee, is that we're going to have open space in Four Corners as a result of these developments because, but wetland, there's a lot of unusable space because there's a huge wetland system back there. And so eventually there are no parks in this area for people to, like there are in other parts of our town. So eventually it will be probably incumbent upon the town to create some sort of park area. And so just kind of thinking about that as we move forward, but.
Yeah, increasing the trail would help a lot. And again, doing some programming in the green space you have for like young children, for a little young children's play area. Maybe there's a way that some of the parking is convertible to a basketball hoop or, at different times, or other ways to make and that's the advantage of being back in that corner is you could, we've done that before is, there's parking spaces there, but maybe they're used once a year and cordoned off to, for another use.
Okay.
I was trying to find out where the unmute button, and I finally found. And so what doesn't have a Windows open. So, okay. So can I talk a couple of points that I thought from your presentation? So first one, I think this is a really important location with great potential for future development. Probably after the store center, it'll be, really important areas where the community members can gather. So, and then this is not the high density development plan. So I think this is pretty viable. Having said that, I think the key is to harmonize with the nature, and we talked a lot about nature and open spaces and connectivity. So not only the connectivity within the property, but also outside of the boundaries, so they can be connected with the nearby pedestrian trail, bike trail, and other areas. I also understand the areas diagonal cross where you can see Mason Brook. That area is also expected to be developed for public, not public park, but some kind of park spaces. Even though that is private areas, the property owner wanted to develop that and open it to the public with the recreational areas focused on pedestrian trails and also bike trails. So that I think that whole space, not only for the northwestern section of the state of the intersection, but also other areas, it's really important. So looking into the future, I think the holistic understanding of the connectivity that could go beyond the property line would be desirable. I think this site is pretty unique in terms of the wetland areas, and I believe the original wetland should function as it should be, but the newly created wetland areas should function properly. And to do that, I think we need to put more, thought onto that space. I'm not quite sure if that wetland will be involved with force of engineers, or it will be just developers who can do this. But I think there are some opportunities that you can actually do better jobs in terms of a planting plan, I'd like to see a more robust and detailed landscape plan, and also present elevation profile of plant selection. I understand that we cannot plant the tall trees with the deep roots because of the elevation change. We are going to lower the grade, but there are other planting palette they can think about in terms of wetland vegetation, and also the area where you indicated as a stream could be transformed into bioswales or other types of LID interventions. And so I think, that will be eventually creating really nice nature landscapes that will be systematically connected with the other types of green spaces in the surrounding areas. So I'm going to stop here, and I can provide more written comments, but more consideration and presentation of landscape should help us understand the value of the areas. I'm fine with architecture stuff and also common spaces. I understand how there are only a few buildings, and it may not be very ideal to have the common spaces within the complex, but just thinking about a little bit bigger than the site-specific landscape. That's my thought.
And I think Soyeon was talking that there's a project she's working on that is off-site, sort of behind the Dick's area. That so that's sort of going to be we hope, we're not sure yet, but we hope that that's going to be a park that is going to be accessible to right in through, actually a little bit more east, right?
East to south area of the intersect, the wooded area there. Yeah, right there.
So that will be an amenity to, not immediately adjacent, but certainly accessible to people who live in Four Corners.
That's great.
Great.
All right, so anything else from the panel and or from the applicants that we need to discuss?
Then could I just ask the applicant to talk a little bit about the facades of the building, the outside, what materials they're using, and
Sure. So primarily, we're going to use clapboard siding. We'll probably use hardy plank, which is fiber cement board, which has much more durability, but you can't tell the difference between that and cedar clapboard siding. So we're using mostly traditional materials. In these large plain areas, we either probably use a tongue and groove flat edge, create a different texture. Again, it'd probably be the same type of material, fiber cement board. The commercial building, I probably should pull those elevations. We're going to use a combination of conventional brick veneer and then split face block with reveals to create kind of a rusticated base. Shingles will all be conventional architectural fiberglass shingles. These will probably be fiber cement panels. They're going to smooth look, painted. Conventional storefront. We're thinking of a dark anodized aluminum at this point. Then we got a bunch of cornices, conventional architectural grade shingles, fiber cement panels, either PVC or fiber cement trim, conventional railings, using different colors, different textures, and either PVC or fiber cement trim. There is some masonry on this building at the end near the amenities community space. This is going to be opened up as we talked about. We're going to add a lot more glass as we discussed. So we can add a lot more glass in this area, but we've got brick at this end, but primarily it's going to be collaborative siding and architectural grade shingles.
Obviously, environmentally, it'd be great if there's more fiber cement or Burrell or whatever and less PVC.
Yes, yes, we'll use fiber cement as much as possible. The thing, fiber cement does take more care in flashing because it's not quite as durable, but yeah, I'm not a big fan of PVC, but we can avoid it, we certainly will.
Right. Anything else for the good of the order? Thank you very much, everyone. This is was helpful for me, actually, just to take another look at this. But so let's see, why don't we adjourn the meeting at 10:30?